Good evening, everybody. Thank you for watching. This is Apollo Detectives Part 3. I am Ben Emlyn-Jones. I am joined by my trusty hosts, Andy Chaplin and Neil Geddes-Ward. And we have a new lineup of panel to talk about the Apollo moon missions this evening. I think there's almost everyone who's ever done anything in this business, which means if we were all in the same buildings, if someone dropped a bomb, that would be it. The Apollo moon hoax would never be uncovered. But luckily, we are in different parts of the world for contingency reasons. We're on Skype by the wonders of technology. I've got some names you'll recognise from the previous show, but also some new ones. So what I'll do is I'm going to ask these gentlemen to introduce themselves briefly. Let us start with, let's start with the guys you were on before. Marcus Allen, how are you?
Hello, Ben. Good evening. Good to be back on the Apollo Detectives. We get there in the end.
We certainly do, yeah. So what brings you to this juncture?
Well, 20 years ago, somebody showed me a photograph about the Apollo moon landings, and I thought, that looks a bit weird. I wonder how they got all that light into the scene. It was one of the Apollo 11 photographs.
Oh, wow.
I trained as a photographer. I'd studied photography. I knew the cameras. I knew the film. So I knew what I was looking at. And it just didn't make sense. And from then on, I just started looking further and more in detail at what was going on and all the stories put about by NASA. I couldn't get any straight answers from them, so I decided to do it myself. What I've been doing for the last 20 years is doing public presentations and asking people to prove me wrong. They haven't done it yet. People have tried. They've made some very rude comments, but it's not usually to do with the science or the technology or the photography. Is to do with personalities, which of course is irrelevant.
It should be, yeah, it should be. Well, thank you, Marcus. Now, we've also got another gentleman who was on the show before, all the way from sunny, freezing Canada. We have Scott Henderson. Hi, Scott.
Hello, Ben. Glad to be back on.
Good to have you back on the show. So tell us about what you do, and it's got nothing to do with that newspaper headline behind you, is it?
Well, it started with that when I was in high school. It was I started in 1969 going into high school. And of course, I've always been a very avid NASA fan and always believed that we'd gone to the moon. And, I started hearing a few things about it in the early 2000s. And by about 2008, I decided I better to have a look. And I've read pretty much everything that they have on the journal site on their report server out there. I have downloaded all of the ground photos of all of the missions on it, and I've studied each one in detail for thousands of hours. And I have quite a few that I can present today.
All right, yeah, she certainly presented quite a lot of them in the last show. It's very interesting. And finally, in the blue corner, we have, not finally, but in the blue corner, we have Bart Sibrel. Now, he's one of the, I think he's one of the first guys I came across in this position, but his work is very, very interesting. And he was very well waxed last time I saw him. Hi, Bart. How are you?
How are you?
Good, good. Thanks for coming on the show. It's great you're joining us. You've never been on before, so tell us a little bit about what you do in the videos you've made and your research.
Sure. My company is Sibrel.com. That's Sibrel.com. And on there, you can get links to my main movies and articles about this. First, I produced A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. That was a 5-year, $500,000 project where we bought documentation from widows of deceased astronauts at $10,000 or $20,000 a pop to do research into the Apollo fraud. And then after I produced that film, originally it was for Fox Television, and we were going to make it just any length. It would have probably come out to be about an hour and a half, but they insisted we cut it down to 45 minutes. We had a great interview with Bill Casing and Ralph Renee that we had to cut out. And after a couple of years went by, I guess from watching TV court dramas as a kid, I thought, well, why don't we just track down some of these astronauts and see how many of them were swear on the Bible, whether they walked on the moon or not. And so I contacted them and asked them, or told them we were doing a documentary about the moon landings, which is true. Obviously, if I said to prove that they're false, they wouldn't have granted an interview. So that was their mistake for not investigating it further, and met with 8 of the Apollo astronauts, often in their homes, privately, on the record and off the record. And one person punched me. One person kicked me in the butt. One person threatened to punch me. And when we were kicked out of one person's house, an astronaut, we left a high-quality wireless microphone on him with the door closed. My inexperienced cameraman threw the camera in the back of the rental car, and it was still recording. And the person who did the transcript for us pointed out that they were discussing calling the CIA to have me assassinated.
Wow.
Now, if they really went to the moon, and I'm some nut who thinks they didn't, why would the CIA be involved in having an investigative journalist assassinated?
You think so? Yeah.
That in and of itself proves that they didn't go. So that's been my main research and my main argument. I mean, all these great people you have on here, Marcus and Scott and Jarrah, they have great, photographic analysis and rocket calculations. But to me, the argument is really simple. They're saying they went 1,000 times farther 50 years ago than they can go today.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Saying, that's like saying Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927, and 50 years later, no one on Earth can have an airplane that flies across the Atlantic.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Doesn't go backwards, does it? That proves they didn't go right there without the flag blowing in the wind, without the shadows intersecting, without the rocket calculations. Logic proves that's an impossibility. If they could go to the moon on the first attempt with 1/1,000th the computing power of a cell phone, then 50 years later, they should be in another solar system. They should have been on Mars 10 years after the moon landing 40 years ago.
Well, that's what we were.
There should be bases all over the moon like there are at the South Pole. I mean, the South Pole has 100-mile-per-hour winds, minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and there are bases there because it's humanly possible. If it were humanly possible to go to the moon, there would be bases there. It's so simple. There are no bases there, which means they can't go. It's so simple.
Well, exactly. You'd think that's what it said in science fiction. That's absolutely true. But finally, this evening, we're going all the way to definitely very, very sunny Australia, from what I've heard. And we have the only man in the world who is licensed to kill moon hoaxes. It is Jarrah White. Hi, Jarrah.
Hello. Jarrah. Nice to be here.
Thanks for joining us. This is Jarrah's not been on before, but he's a very, very interesting chap. So tell us about your research, because you were sort of YouTube, and then your channel's very good. So how did that come about?
Well, back during my childhood, I was a huge fan of NASA, astronomy, space exploration. I had books. I'm not talking simply books intended for children, but rather college level textbooks, about space, about the universe and whatnot. And, I dreamed of becoming the first man on Mars. I grew up believing, with the mindset that by the end of the 20th century or by early 21st century, we'd have bases on the moon, we'd have missions to Mars underway and stuff like that. And well, during my teenage years, I learned of the Apollo moon landing hoax conspiracy, and I thought, well, this is interesting. I took it with a grain of salt, but I decided to basically, go back to everything that I had learned previously. And of course, I sourced out the various books and videos that these people had put out. Like I found Bill Casing's book. This is the original copy. This is from 1974. I found his updated 1980, I think it was 1982.
Those real classics you've got there,
1981 expanded edition. That was by Desert Publications. Of course, I found Ralph Renee's book, and of course I later acquired the copyrights to that. It's a story for later. And of course I managed to source down various reference materials. Like I found Prospects for Interstellar Travel by Malden, which was one of Renee's sources. Excellent. I found this doesn't have the dust jacket. I found Astronautical Engineering and Science, which was one of the books by the original NASA engineers and scientists, basically compiling all the reasons why going to the moon is going to be extremely dangerous. And in fact, I actually got in touch with Ralph Renee. We became kind of friends, and before he died, he actually sent me some more of his reference materials. He sent me this. This is James McKinnon's technical memorandum. This is about the solar flares of 1972, which took NASA by surprise. Anyways, I had basically done all this research, and of course I went to the various pro-NASA websites and publications, basically trying to say, no, we really went to the moon. And as I was cross-referencing all this material with what I had previously learned about space and about the moon, what the conspiracy theorists were arguing, and what their opponents were saying in response, it became pretty clear to me that these opponents were not so much trying to prove that we went to the moon, but rather discredit the messenger by casting aspersions on their credibility, aspersions on their research, and basically even using logical fallacies like straw man arguments, misrepresentations of what these opponents, what these conspiracy theorists had said.
Yes,
and,
that's certainly true.
Yes, when Bill Casey died in 2005, I was really lit up because these individuals, Phil Plait, Jay Windley, the others and stuff, they had all basically started dancing on his grave, publishing spurious articles. Like one of the things that Phil Plait was going around claiming was Casey claimed that all space travel was impossible. Well, there's no such claim. In fact, there are various statements in Casey's book in which he actually cites unmanned missions, like he cites the surveyor missions, for geological data. He cites various missions that were used, for training, mission control, for tracking spacecrafts and the like. It's obvious that he believed space travel was possible. He just didn't believe in the moon landings. And so I felt really, really pissed off by the way they had treated Casey when he was no longer around to defend himself. So I decided to basically write a response. I wrote this long. By the time I finished writing, it was about the size of a phone book, and of course, I didn't have as much self-control as I have now and stuff. And well, it brought out the worst in me. So there was a lot of less than pleasant things I had to say about these individuals, and I decided, well, I should tone this down a little bit and stuff. By this stage, I had done my film and TV course, and I decided, well, why don't I produce it into a film series, into a documentary? It was originally just going to be 2 or 3 films, but it ended up being the ongoing Moonfaker series it is now. And you said earlier that I have a license to kill. Well, Moonfaker, Moonraker, and it seemed like the obvious in joke, I guess. And so I started having the intro of me basically shooting down the gun barrel, or rather the interstage ring of the Saturn. So that's how it all came about.
Brilliant. Well, you mentioned the names that have come up in this discussion already are Ralph Rille and Bill Casey, who sadly are not with us anymore. They are the pioneers of this movement to expose the truth and to question what no one else dares to question. And I think they'd be very happy to see us here this evening, those 2 men, because there's still plenty of us still around, and there's still people asking these questions 50 years after the first landing. And this is 2019 where we're speaking now. It is in July, in just a few months' time, it will be the 50th anniversary of the supposed first landing on the moon. Although, as Marcus actually was on my own radio show in December, because we did a 50th anniversary for Apollo 8, which was allegedly the first manned mission to the moon without a landing. But this won't go away. These questions will not go away. They're still here. So anyone watching this, we're probably only saying what a lot of people are thinking, but will not dare. And I hope with this particular program, it'll encourage more and more people to speak out. We are a very small vocal tip of a huge silent iceberg, but let's make the rest of that iceberg as vocal as the tip. Now, I want to come back to Bart, because Bart has produced some really interesting videos. It's very interesting films, some very interesting information about this, and I know he'd like to get straight into that. Including some really interesting, as he mentioned already, some pretty interesting insights into the mentality of some of the people who allegedly could perform this famous feat and the forces behind them. So, Bart, how did you come about making your video?
Well, I grew up being the biggest fan of the moon missions that I knew of. I mean, my dad was in the Air Force, and I grew up around aviation, and my dad got a VIP package of 9x12 color prints of Apollo 11, gave them to me as a 4-year-old. I had them up on my wall for about 10 years, looking at them every single day, 3,600 times in 10 years. And then when I was 14, I saw Bill Casey on a television, and he said we didn't go to the moon. I'm like, oh, I've never heard of that one before. Let me take a second look at these pictures. And sure enough, the shadows intersect. There's no burn crater under the lunar module, and you can kind of see the background, soil, and the soil they're standing on are in 2 different colors, where you can see almost a straight line, which is a fake backdrop. And that kind of planted the seed in my mind. And 10 years after that, I'd become a filmmaker. And one day I'm doing some editing for the gentleman who produced the show I had seen as a 14-year-old 10 years earlier. I said, do you remember the guy on your program who said we didn't go to the moon? He said, well, call the San Francisco office. I did. They said they were days away from deleting all 10-year-old files. I hooked up with Bill Casey, and he and I had been to Japan and toured around talking and lecturing about this. We interviewed him at length on camera, and I came to the conclusion that, with all this evidence that the Soviets were 5 times more advanced than we were, that 2 of the 3 astronauts wouldn't give interviews, that the administrator of NASA resigned days before the first mission, all these things, I said there's at least, a 1 out of 4 chance that they didn't go to the moon. Now, if the police came in and said, one of you 4 blokes here is a murderer, then I'd probably keep an eye on all of you, regardless of right. So to me, 1 out of 4 chance that the greatest event in human history was falsified, to me, was a sobering, large possibility. And we had an investor who gave us a total for these 2 films, $1 million. This gentleman has an IQ higher than Bill Gates and Einstein. He works for NASA as a board member of an aerospace company building rockets for them. This is the guy who financed our films, and he knows from an engineering point of view, the lunar module didn't have enough battery power to combat against 250 degrees outside and get it down to 72 degrees like they claim. Had they made it too hot or too cold, it would have been believable. But they're so arrogant, they say it's the perfect 72 degrees on a bank of car batteries. They wouldn't power a Cadillac for more than 20 minutes in the desert at against 100 degrees. He said the computers with 1/millionth the computing power of a cell phone, there's no way they could synchronize going from 0 miles per hour on the moon to 4,000 miles per hour in the alleged command module orbiting the moon, and synchronize that. If they were off by more than 1/20th of a second, they would have missed each other, and there was no way computers were fast enough to calculate that. So all this information, 3.5 years into the film, I pop in a tape and it says on the screen, do not show to the public. I'm like, oh, this should be interesting. And even though I asked for unedited footage, everything was edited except this and one other tape. So I hit fast forward and I see like a little blue ball Earth with the rest of the screen, black, like the Earth floating in space. And apparently this is supposed to be the camera lens at the window of the glass shooting the tiny Earth far away as if they're halfway to the moon. In fact, the part that they aired that says Neil Armstrong calling in from 130,000 miles out, right?
So that's supposed to be a very important piece of footage. Yeah.
Well, it's one of the special effects shots that the astronauts themselves photographed. So the camera was really at the back of the spacecraft. The circular window has, a part of the Earth outside of it, and they either are sectioning off the Earth, or have a transparency that, to mimic the Earth. And basically, you see in real time, unedited, them faking being halfway to the moon right in front of your eyes. And then there's a third party of audio of the CIA that they accidentally let be recorded. And so you hear NASA say the TV picture looks great, and then exactly 4 seconds go by, you hear this third party say, talk, and then Neil Armstrong speaks. So originally I thought, well, he's not paying attention. They're saying, hey, pay attention here. But in fact, they wanted him to wait 4 seconds to give the impression that he's further away from the Earth than he really was. He was really about 250 miles up, and he could respond directly like you and I are, but there was supposed to be an increased radio delay. So they counted off 2 seconds for the radio signal to reach the astronauts if they were halfway to the moon, 2 seconds for it to come back, and then they said talk to make sure that he didn't speak until 4 seconds go by to create this fake time delay as if he were really halfway to the moon. The lights come up, you see the real position of the camera, you can see all this, and a funny thing happened on the way to the moon. And, 3.5 years into it, I'm like, oh my gosh, they really didn't go to the moon. I call up Bill and he's like, well, Bart, I told you. And I'm like, yeah, but they really didn't go. They really didn't go. I got proof right in front of my eyes. He's laughing, saying, well, Bart, I told you. And then you really think about it. It's so simple. They're claiming they went 1,000 times farther than they can go today with 50-year-older technology. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, even here on Earth, Mount Everest, right, and the South Pole, that took numerous tries for them to go. And in fact, in the entire history of aviation, there's never been a flying machine that worked on its first occasion. The 747 was built with 10 years newer technology than the Apollo rocket, and it took 162 attempts to get that fuselage off the ground. And yet they're claiming they did the most difficult one on the very first attempt with 50 years older technology. And I challenge people on 2 things. I've got that one photograph, and a funny thing happened on the way to the moon where the astronaut shadow is at 12 o'clock and a rock about 5 feet away is at 9 o'clock. And I say, videotape going outside in sunlight, two objects in that position and going 90-degree shadows. And if you can do that in sunlight, I'll say we didn't go to the moon. And if you can show me any time in the entire history of the world that a technological achievement was accomplished, like the automobile or the airplane or nuclear power, that 50 years after the accomplishment, no one on Earth was able to repeat it. If you can show me one other occasion where that happened, then I'll admit that we didn't go.
That's
and even though all these points are valid, all of Jarrah's points and Marcus's point, Scott's points and Percy's points about the photographs and the rocket fuel and all that, I have documentation from von Braun where he says it would take 3 rockets, each weighing taller than the Empire State Building, each weighing 800,000 tons to reach the moon, and they went to one weighing 2,500. We have all that documentation to prove that they didn't go. Yeah. But it's really just logic. There's never been an accomplishment in the entire history of the world that no one could repeat 50 years later. That's like saying 50 years ago, I built an automobile that could go 1,000 miles an hour, and 50 years later, the fastest car is 1 mile per hour. Because that's what they're saying. And that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. If this weren't a god to people, this has become a god. And one thing I've noticed, Jarrah mentioned this earlier, that people use name calling, right? Now, you remember those artists in France a year or two ago who got blown up or killed or shot because they drew Muhammad?
Charlie Hebdo, yeah.
In some, bad light or whatever. Here's a fact. The more fanatical someone becomes, the more they prove that they're wrong. And we who are on the side of saying, hey, people, wake up. The government lied. What a surprise. They didn't go to the moon. None of us has ever called someone a jerk, cursed at them or whatever because they think that we really went to the moon. But that's the venom we do receive. I receive emails from people saying they wish they could watch me, my family, and my children burn alive before their eyes simply because I said the moon landings are fake. This has become an idol to people, a false god. People, when they win the World Cup or the Super Bowl, they say, well, we won. Oh, were you on the team? Well, no. Were you in the stadium? Well, no. Or any of the players from Tennessee on the Tennessee Titans team? Well, no, not really. But we won. We're an intellectual. We're a teacher. We're a scientist. And therefore, we went to the moon. It's the only positive conspiracy, really. And you're trying to take candy away from a baby. Whoever killed JFK, he's still dead. Whoever did 9/11, 3,000 people are still dead. But this is a positive conspiracy. You're telling someone their home team that won the World Cup or the Super Bowl did it by cheating. And they don't want to hear the truth. I talked to a professor at a major university, and I said, what if you saw an Apollo astronaut go on national TV and tearfully confess that they were fake? What would you think then? He said, I'd still think that they went.
Yeah, the person involved would be you just imagine if any of them did, the media would simply say, oh, he's obviously lost his mind, he's getting old and things like that.
Yeah, and here let me read 2 quick quotes here. Okay, this is from Mark Twain. Mark Twain said this: it is easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. And here's what Carl Sagan said, and some believe he was hinting at the moon landings when he said this right before his death. One of the saddest lessons of history is this, he said: if we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. We're no longer interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we have been taken. Once you give a charlatan power over you, you almost never get it back.
That's
true. He was specifically talking about the moon landings.
There's many examples that could apply to, quite frankly. I should point out, just on the subject of abuse and ad hominems and things like that, during the course of the production of these particular videos, we've had a lot of abuse. There's a certain individual who, unfortunately, is a countryman of Jarrah's, who said he'd like one of the panel members to be fed into a wood chipper, feet first, so he can hear him scream before he dies. He said this. He didn't apologise for it. That is just typical of what we're talking about here. And
well, the fanaticism proves that they're wrong. Just like, if Muhammad was really God, he doesn't need people to defend himself. He doesn't need you to shoot. He's God. He can destroy them with lightning bolts, right? If they really went to the moon, then anyone who says otherwise is an idiot. And as Shakespeare said, thou dost protest too much. Another quote says, the likelihood of one individual being right increases in direct proportion to the intensity to which others are trying to prove him wrong. If they really went to the moon, there shouldn't be a single website to defend it. It should simply be there in the NASA record and be there in the encyclopedia. But there are hundreds of websites taking tens of thousands of hours to defend something that's supposed to be so obvious.
And another good point you made. I mean, I of course, everyone knows about the moon landings. I grew up with it. I mean, my parents remember it, and they stayed up and watched it, and because it was on late at night on TV here, and there was a lot of science fiction at the time, and I love some of that science fiction. Arthur C. Clarke and other authors were writing about this. It really inspired people. It was one of the bright sparks in what was otherwise a very unhappy decade, where you had the Vietnam War and the Kennedy assassination and the Martin Luther King assassination and assassination of other people. And everyone thought that the world's going to pot. There was violence in the streets. There was violence in across the world. And then suddenly we had this wonderful moment where we all land on the moon. And I tell you what, anyone who was in that position at that time, who could see forward to the present day, would gasp in dismay at how little progress has been made since then. And as you pointed out, Bart, we're supposed to be on Mars by now. If this level of progress has continued from the first rocket Sputnik going up in 57, and then the first moon landing 69, and you extrapolate that into the future, and you have basically a landing of a bases on the moon in the 1980s, landing on Mars in the 1980s, holidays on Jupiter by now in 2019. So
maybe it's moons.
Yeah, I want to visit that hotel in the rings. I want to see the rings of Saturn, man. Yeah. Come on. So
in America, we had Tricky Dick Nixon president, right? Now we have a publication written by von Braun himself that says to go to the moon in one rocket is impossible. It'll take 3 rockets, each weighing 800,000 tons. First, you'd have to go and build the space station, and then from there, ferry the fuel. Of course, the space station wasn't even officially finished until a few years ago. And then Richard Nixon said the number one enemy of America during this time was the domestic protests against the Vietnam War. And then we have Bill Casey. Now, the reason why Bill Casey is so unique is as he was basically a technical writer editing English grammar between not so educated people in the military talking back and forth, and he wanted to kind of spruce up their grammar to make them look more intelligent. So he had this very high security clearance because he was one of the few people who saw the whole picture. The argument that they couldn't fool the 300,000 people involved is true. But that's like saying a bank teller and a CEO at the bank know the same thing. You think they're really going to tell the guy? Are they stupid enough, the CIA, to tell the guy who makes the glove or the door, hey, they're really not going to the moon, but don't tell anybody? You only had 3 picture and a TV, 3 people in each mission and a TV picture controlled by the government. And then so Bill Casey was in this pyramid at the very top, editing all these, departmentalized things, and he saw that memo that said the odds of going successfully to the moon and back with their equipment and not killing the people was 1 in 10,000. So Nixon has this choice. Already, the morale of America is the lowest it's ever been since 1776. And so is he going to take a 99.99% chance of killing these people on live television and throwing the morale 10 times further down the sewer? No, he's going to bluff. That's the only way you can guarantee it, is to bluff. And that's what this amazing tape that I uncovered proves. And a funny thing happened on the way to the moon. They're faking being halfway to the moon right in front of your eyes, which proves they cannot go halfway. They cannot leave Earth orbit. And what a surprise. 2 years ago, Kelly Smith from NASA says about the Orion project that the radiation belts that surround the Earth that are 1,000 miles up and about 25, 30,000 miles thick beyond that, Every manned mission has been below that, orbiting the Earth, except going to the moon. He calls it a dangerous field of radiation. And he says, and we must first learn to protect astronauts from this dangerous radiation before we send people through this region of space, which means the technology does not yet exist. So I call to send them through without killing them. So I call up NASA. I say, hey, let me talk to Kelly. Oh, no, he didn't give interviews anymore. Oh, no doubt. And then I said,
am I thinking that they've recently cancelled the Mars expedition that they were going to do? I think recently.
Are you talking about the Mars One?
The truth
that one got bankrupt.
Let me just finish with this.
Oh, okay.
They sent 2 Geiger counters. The Orion project sent an unmanned spacecraft 3,600 miles up, U-turned and come back. So if a person walks to the store, U-turns and comes back, their destination was the store. The point of the mission was the store. So what is that? 3,600 miles. It's the radiation. They sent 2 different types of Geiger counters in there to measure the radiation and to come back. That was the whole point of the mission. So I call them up and I say, hey, can I please have those readings of the radiation? They say that information is classified. Now I'm thinking, wait a minute. Is the temperature of the sun classified information? Is the amount of helium in Jupiter's atmosphere, is that classified? So how could the radiation readings, an element of nature, why would that be classified? Only if by proving that it's like, 100 to 1,000 times a lethal dose, that means they didn't go to the moon. That's why they won't release that information. It's amazing. It proves it right there. They didn't go. Not to mention they destroyed all the schematics. They destroyed the original videotapes. They destroyed the original telemetry data. That's like saying Bill Gates spent $150 billion to build the first computer. And when he was done, he threw it and all the schematics into the fire. They should have done that with a nuclear bomb, but they didn't. And now nuclear bombs are 100 times more powerful. So they're saying, show me any other time in history where a technological accomplishment, the original hardware and the original schematics were destroyed. Show me that in history. That's never happened before.
Bart, if I may interrupt.
Let me just conclude with the fact that they destroyed it is proof that they didn't go.
Come to you, Jarrah.
Because if they really went, they would never destroy the hardware or the data to build the hardware. But they would destroy it if they faked it because the technical information could prove that it was impossible.
I think they said they didn't even destroy it. I think they lost it. I think they said that they lost it.
Same thing.
They lost it and then they taped over the tapes.
The fact that they destroyed the data is proof that they didn't go, because if they really went, they would have never destroyed it. They would have only destroyed it if they faked it to cover their tracks, which is what they did, which proves that they faked it.
Yeah. Jarrah, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I would like to actually offer some additional commentary on what Bart was just talking about and stuff. You mentioned, Bart, the Orion mission, which carried those 2 Geiger counters into space. They've since released that at least a graph of what the data showed, and I don't remember the exact numbers and stuff, but what the data actually showed. They had a graph. If I find the article, I'll share link it. But anyways, it's important to note that the spacecraft, the Orion capsule, is rated at about 20 grams per square centimeter of shielding, which is about 3 times the shielding that they had on Apollo. Now, to get a prediction of what the Van Allen belts are going to be like, what kind of doses you would expect, they have the AP8, the AE8. AE is for electrons and P is for protons. Together, usually referred to as the AX8. More recently, they released the AX9, which is the more updated model, which is supposed to account for all these shortcomings of the original model. And so they pitched their results from Orion against their predictions for the AX9, and what they found is that the dose rates that they received on the Orion were much more akin to what they were predicting for a shield at about 10 grams per square centimeter, which just goes to show there's much more radiation up there than they were predicting in their own models.
Jarrah, one of the rebuttals me and Neil have come across with this is, and I think one of our previous guests who was pro-landing mentioned, was that, yes, but it's a different type of radiation. It's not the type of radiation that could penetrate kind of like their shield, whatever their shields were. It's a different type of radiation. You've probably come across this rebuttal before. What do you think to that? What's your view on that?
Well, I've got actually proof that it is wrong. In fact, I'll just screen share something with you right now. Let me just get this page up here. Hang on. I've never done this before. Let me try this screen sharing.
From memory,
can you see my screen now?
No, we still see your face at the moment. I do anyway. Neil, what do you see? I
can see Jarrah's face still.
Basically, I'll turn this off then. Let me try this.
I think what it was like some radiation.
I see. Hang on, I have to start sharing. That's what I have to do. I have to hit start sharing.
Some radiation is stopped by.
Well, I'm going to put a link in here.
I see it.
I found from the 1950s, and it shows that the radiation. They're specifically talking about the radiation belt. You may see a little clip here, and according to the REM of a lethal dose, they say in this late 1950s science program that the Van Allen radiation belts are 73,200 times a lethal dose. That's what they said back then.
Mm.
Well, here's the data that's actually from that Astronautical Engineering and Science book. This is by J.W. Keller et al. 1963, and basically what this graph shows is this here is the proton energy, and this here is the range in grams per square centimeter. Basically, the higher the energy, the further these protons can penetrate. And so you can see clearly from this graph that I've looked at this line here. This represents how much shielding they had on Apollo. The Apollo capsule was 8 grams per square centimeter, and so this is how much radiation they can attenuate. You see, it can only block out protons with energies up to about 8 mega electron volts. And the reason this is important is because the Van Allen radiation belts, they have protons in the range of 0.1 to 400 mega electron volts. Of course, the flux gets a bit lower towards the higher energies and stuff, but when you do the calculations, you find that the amount of radiation that they would have received.
Okay, Jarrah's breaking up slightly.
Yes.
Jarrah?
Here we go. I did the calculations for the. Can you hear me now? Testing.
You're okay now. You're breaking up a minute ago. Carry on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine now.
Okay. Well, basically, what I managed to do was I used the data to basically calculate the doses. I'll just put the actual. Managed to get all the actual doses. This is the fluxes. You see, what you use, if you know the coordinates for a given region in space, such as the trajectory that's been attributed to the Apollo missions, you plug that into the AX8, and this will give you a flux. Basically, how much particles at a given energy are basically interacting with this square centimeter of space. Okay, so here, for example, let me pull the first one here. Here, for example, let's see, L equals 1.44, and the B over B naught is 2. This is basically in the first minute of transit to the belts. For 10 MeV, we see there's 2.87 by 10 to the 2. All right, so that's how many protons there are at that energy at 10 mega electron volts. Basically, you do the calculations. I'll show you the calculations that you do. Where is it? Sometimes here it is. It's down here. Oh, actually, no, it was in the first document. Sorry, I haven't looked at these in a while. Here we go. This is the calculations that you. Can I enlarge this? No, I can't. Okay, but basically, this is the calculations that you do. You would basically take the protons per square centimeter per second. You would multiply that by the surface area of a human. And because it's in seconds, you want to convert that to hours. There are 3,600 seconds in an hour. That gives you the amount of protons per hour. Then you would want to, sorry, that's just converting it to protons per square meter per hour. Sorry, then you would want to multiply it by the surface area of a human, which will basically give you the protons per hour. Now, each proton has a certain energy, so you would times that by the energy in question. That will give you the amount of energy in mega electron volts per hour. Now, the 1 mega electron volt is equal to 1.6 by 10 to the minus 13 joules. So they use that conversion. That will give you the amount of joules per hour. And now the human body has a mass of about 75 kilograms. So you divide that by 75. That will give you the amount of gray per hour. And if you choose, you can further convert that to rads per hour. Right? And in this case, I converted it to rad per minute. Now that will tell me how much rads they would have received. This is actually the absorbed dose, though. You see, there's an absorbed dose and there's an equivalent dose. The absorbed dose tells you. Let me see if I can show the size again. There we go. The absorbed dose is the amount of radiation that's actually been absorbed into the human body. To find out what kind of damage it will do, you want to convert that into the equivalent dose. Screw this up here. There we go. You want to convert that to the equivalent dose, and so you would multiply it by a Q factor. Now, I did a bunch of Q factors because than 2 mega electron volts, the Q factor can be between 2 and 5. So you basically would take the absorbed dose and you multiply it. In this case, I found that a Q factor of 5 seems to be the most because I compared my calculations with. Hang on a second. Screen screwing up here. Hang on. Hope this works. Technical problems. There we go. Yeah. So basically, I found a Q factor of 5 is most consistent with other calculations that have been done for solar flares that are known of known fluence, right? And so, as I said, the Q factor was most consistent with 5. So I did the calculations, and as I said before, the AP8 actually has a whole bunch of shortcomings. You see, because it's very difficult to measure protons and electrons at higher energies, you see, because as the protons get higher in energy, they actually will penetrate completely through the spacecraft, and they will only deposit a little amount of energy in the detector. So for every hit that you're getting by the detector, there's probably 100 or so more that you're not detecting. So you got to basically account for that. And I found for the inclination that's been attributed to Apollo, a correction factor of 3 is most consistent. So basically, I take the absorbed Q factor of 5 and the correction factor of 3, and that gives me the dose. I did some for the protons that would have been stopped in the shield. I calculated secondary neutron dose, and so from this graph, the equivalent dose from the protons alone would have been 103.68 rads. That's the absorbed dose. I mean, that's the equivalent dose that's deposited in the body.
Jarrah, these doses, at what kind of altitude or distance from the Earth are? Because presumably it would vary. So the more into space you go, the higher the dosage. So what are we looking at with the distances here?
Well, we're looking at about 1,000 to 5,000 kilometers up. This is referring to the actual inner Van Allen belt.
Yeah.
So I couldn't do the calculations for the electrons, because with the electrons, we don't have adequate or rather basically we don't have a good model for the electrons, because the ones that would actually penetrate the spacecraft, they're extremely hard to measure. In fact, the AP8 only goes up to about 7 electrons. Those are the ones would be stopped in the shield, although there would be a secondary X-ray dose and stuff. But these are primarily considered the protons. These purely considered the protons and the secondary neutrons that would have been, because when the protons crash into the shield, they release a secondary spray of neutrons from the material that it's colliding with.
Yeah.
You see, so
this is a bit
protons.
Sorry, this is a bit above my.
From Jarrah's calculations, from the calculations from that 1950s program, and from an article we have from Scientific American magazine, the magnitude ranges anywhere from 10 to 100 to up to 7,300 times more radiation than a lethal dose. That's why they cannot go to the moon. Plus, they do not have a rocket large enough. Plus, they would need to ferry fuel to a way station at a space station first. They did not do. I've got to hit the road, but I wanted to read one thing from Bill Clinton, of all people, before I go. This is from a book that he wrote called My Life. This is his memoir of after being president for 8 years. And this is on page 156 of the book. He says this, quoting this word for word: just a month before, Apollo 11 astronauts Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong had their colleague Michael Collins aboard spaceship Columbia and, quote, walked on the moon, beating by 5 months President Kennedy's goal of putting a man on the moon before the decade was out. The old carpenter I was with, he was working on homes at the time, asked me if I really believed it happened. I said, sure, because I saw it on television. He disagreed. He said that he didn't believe it for a minute, that them television fellers could make things look real that weren't. Then Clinton says this: back then, I thought he was a crank. During my 8 years in Washington, I saw some things on TV that made me wonder if he wasn't ahead of his time. So we have a president of the United States going on record doubting the authenticity of the moon landings. Apparently in China, no one believes they're real. In the Soviet Union, no one believes they're real. And we're down here in America, I think the latest poll is getting up to 25% doubt the authenticity, the last vestige of them. You know, you go on my YouTube channel and you click on any of my films, and there's immediately a Britannica link assuring people that no, the moon landings are real. I got demonetized. Everybody who says that the moon landings are real, they give you money for advertising. You say that they're fake, they take your money away. We're living in this upside down Orwellian world where if you lie, they give you money, and if you tell the truth, they take away your money. Now that is simply pathetic. You know, these people who have anger toward me should have anger toward the federal government for taking their tax dollars and lying to them, taking their tax dollars and spying on them, taking their tax dollars and poisoning them and wasting them. We spend $1 trillion every 2 years on the military, and 9/11 still happened. And then George Bush Jr. has the audacity to go to ground zero and be photographed as a hero when it was his fault that it happened. He was commander-in-chief. He should have resigned after 9/11 happened. And yet our country is so backwards, they think that he's a hero. He shows up at ground zero and everyone applauds him. He takes pictures of him with the firemen and the American flag, and everyone says, yay, George Bush Jr., when it was his fault that 9/11 happened. Do people not see this? They're so brainwashed by television. People are watching 5.5 hours of TV a day, 7 days a week. That's almost 40 hours a week of watching television. That's how much they spend at their job. People are literally hypnotized by it. And people were calling the networks when Gilligan's Island was on the air saying, you know, they were calling the Coast Guard saying, you need to rescue these people. Don't you realize there's people on a deserted island here? And people say, well, I know it's true because I saw it on television. Well, fortunately, those generation of people are dying off. People with open eyes are seeing it. You know, if some president really hates the media and really hates the CIA, he could kill them both with one thing. He could order one of the astronauts to confess on national TV that the media and the CIA, you know, faked the moon landings. When Watergate happened, it came out that there were 400 journalists on the CIA payroll. This is back in the 70s. They came in there. Woodward and Bernstein got a report from the CIA that they had 400 journalists lying to the American public through Time Magazine, through CBS, through ABC. It's unbelievable. You know what I mean? Again, if you could show me any time in technological history that a milestone was made and no one could repeat it for 50 years, then I'll say that the moon landings are real. The fact that they can't repeat it and they can only go 1/1000th the distance with 50 years newer technology, what more proof do you need? You know?
Bart, if I may interrupt just a second, I managed to find that the data from the Orion capsule that you were talking about earlier and stuff, I mentioned earlier that they managed to release I guess they've declassified it. Let me just see if I can find the graph that I was talking about here. Just getting the data. This is, what's the name of this document? This is battery-operated independent radiation detector data report from Exploration Mission Test 1. That was the name of the Orion flight in question. Not a very catchy title, I know, but let me see if I can find the basically it has a graph which shows just how much they underpredicted the kind of radiation the capsule was going to be getting itself into. I can just find
here's a link I just set in the chat area, and Neil, you can use these links later, you know, to link at the end of the video or whatever you want to do. But here's the link to Scientific American magazine that says that the radiation is at this time from the Geiger counter probe that they sent up, which broke because it was vibrating so much because the radiation was so severe it broke the Geiger counter. And in this, they say what a lethal dose is, like 1 rem per day or week or year, whatever it is, I forget. And then that compared to the radiation dose of going through, and it's something like 10 to 100 times the lethal dose in this publication. Not to mention a time when they say on television it's 1,000 times a lethal dose. I don't know what more. Then you have the creator of the rocket, saying that you need 3 rockets, 800,000 tons each, to go to the moon, and then he builds a Saturn V, which weighs 2,500 tons, to go to the moon. I mean, is this guy incompetent? Can he be wrong by 30,000% on his math? Can math change 30,000% in a year? I mean, what's that all about? You know?
I think from memory, myself and Neil have come across kind of the rebuttal to this. They said that the 1950s data was wrong, and they came across data later than that kind of corrected it, or different data.
Well, obviously, it had to be wrong. Otherwise, they couldn't go to the moon, right? They couldn't fake it. What else are they going to say?
Yeah.
Of course they were wrong. Oops, we were off by 30,000%. Now, would you trust a salesman who gave you a quote on something that was off by 30,000%, or would you trust?
But I think
the health department that rated a restaurant and the health.
I think what the argument was there was better technology later on to give a more accurate reading, as opposed to 1950s technology. So whether this was like late 50s or early 60s, I don't know. But they had.
But that's not true, because calculators are the same. They still come up 1 + 1 = 2, and the type of fuel they used, and these rockets never changed either. So math never changed, and the fuel never changed, and the weight never changed of the rocket. So how could its capability change? I mean, it's one lie after another. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to have to hit
Bart,
the road.
just before you go, Bart, I just found the diagram in question and stuff. Now, can you see my screen? Okay, well, this is the data that was released from the Orion capsule. It had 2 Geiger counters. It was called Bird 1, Bird 2, and stuff, or rather Bird left and right here in this case. Okay, now you see these curves. Now, the Bird 1, the Bird 2 are basically somewhere in the middle here, where my mouse is moving across. Now, look at these. These other curves are the predictions, what their models. This is their own Bible for the Van Allen fluxes and stuff. This is the new and improved Bible, I should say, because this is the AX9. As I said before, the AX9 is supposed to account for some of the shortcomings of the AX8. Now, the Orion capsule is shielded at about 20 grams per square centimeter. Look where they were predicting the doses for 20 grams per square centimeter. It's right at the bottom here, right? Instead, we see that the actual measurements that they got from the Orion capsule is more in line with what they were predicting for 10 grams per square centimeter. 10 grams per square centimeter is about the shielding used on the space shuttle. It's somewhat above what they used on Apollo, and Apollo was only 7 grams per square centimeter. And so it just goes to show if this is how off their predictions were. Think about what the Apollo crews would have been experiencing in shielding that is about 3 times less, almost 3 times less of what the Orion capsule had on it.
Well, I don't know what to say. To me, there's so much more evidence that we did not go to the moon than there is. And if a professor, right, of a major university, Vanderbilt University, right, has the audacity to say, if he saw an astronaut confess that the moon missions were fake on live television, he would still think that they went, then we can see there that psychology is overriding people's intellect of being able to discern truth from lies, because he just wants to believe it. He wants to believe in Santa Claus, no matter what anyone else says. You know what I mean? Even if Santa Claus took off his beard and said, "I'm Bob the bartender from down the street," he still believes in Santa Claus anyway. That shows you that there's emotions. People's emotions are tied into this thing, and they are blocking it. It's like you're in love with a girl and everyone thinks she's not good for you, and everyone sees it except you. You know what I mean? And that's what it is with these moon landings. I mean, people.
Yeah, I had a similar statement. I remember one of my opponents actually made a similar statement. Jay Windley, the big pro-guy and stuff, he had a statement. I think it wasn't. He said, "If anyone figured that there was a hoax, which just demonstrates just how out of touch with reality the guy is."
Yeah.
And
Jarrah, could I ask you a question?
Hmm?
I just want to know, when you're looking at the Orion numbers there.
Yes.
Okay, and I've looked at that same document, and I also looked up how they set the tests up. The battery operated radiation detectors on the setup were set inside of closets, shielded closets, with a meter of sand around it and then a meter of water covering them as well.
Yes, that's another good point too, because that gives them additional shielding.
Just inside the craft. And the other thing is that Apollo has windows. Orion has the windows completely covered. So it's not a real fair comparison. I mean, how much shielding do the windows have?
I think the I'm not sure what kind of glass they were using on the Apollo. I imagine they would have been using something like lead glass. I'm not sure, but I'd have to look into that. But I know that they had multiple paned windows and stuff, and they used a nitrogen filling in between the panes. I don't remember the exact dimensions of it. I actually have a document on my computer somewhere.
I just like to say,
I have one as well. The rectangular windows or square windows have a double pane with double seals.
Correct. Yes.
And the triangular ones only have a single pane. The outside glass is for micromedia shielding, and it is vented to the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Bart has now left us, so I'd just like to say a big thank you to Bart Sibrel for taking part in this particular program. Do check him out on YouTube, and he's a very interesting chap. So much appreciated to Bart Sibrel for taking part in the Apollo Detectives. Very interesting other statements we've had there about. I didn't know about the windows on the Apollo spacecraft at all, and the data that Jarrah has discovered, or the actual evidence relating to radiation exposure. When it comes to the Van Allen belts. And the one thing I found out was that the Van Allen belts are very, very different from other things such as cosmic rays. So there's other risks apart from these classified levels of radiation around the Earth, plus the fact that they only discovered 3 years before the famous speech by President John F. Kennedy. It makes you think, you can look back at it now, and you could say, well, the astronauts were obviously lucky. They were flying through the solar maximum, but they didn't get solar flare, which would have killed them. They didn't know exactly how big or how intense or how they fluctuated with the solar cycle the Van Allen belts were. So the astronauts were simply lucky. Well, it's easy to say that afterwards, looking back. But if you're in the 1960s planning the Apollo mission, knowing this is going to be a big media event in the middle of the Cold War, you can't say that so glibly. That's the important point.
Let's go ahead, Marcus.
Go, Marcus.
No, I was just going to say, you could argue about radiation as much as we like, and it's certainly a lethal place to be out in the Van Allen radiation belts. But if they weren't going to go through them with the Apollo craft, and they made that decision probably 66, 67, it didn't really matter how much radiation there was because it wouldn't affect them anyway.
Mm.
There's also something else to add. Sorry, there's something else to add to this. They've kind of changed something, and recently they've basically said that actually where we thought the Earth's atmosphere is, it actually extends beyond the moon. They're actually saying that now Earth's atmosphere goes 630,000 kilometers away, whereas before I think it was about 240,000 kilometers away. So I think they could be preempting something. I think they could be preempting people like us and saying, well, of course, the atmosphere encompasses the moon, so we weren't really going out of Earth's atmosphere. Do you reckon that's what they're preempting?
If I may make a correction about that, I've actually been kind of distressed by people's reactions to the articles that have been appearing about the atmosphere extending out to the moon. What the article actually refers to, it refers to the outermost layer of the moon. You see, when people say atmosphere, they don't necessarily mean the dense part of the atmosphere we're sitting in right now. The higher up you go, the atmosphere, decreases in pressure and density. If you were to climb Everest, you need to bring tanks of oxygen to survive. If you're flying a high altitude plane, or even that little capsule that Felix Basinger guy, whatever his name was, jumped from the Red Bull thing, he obviously had to wear a spacesuit because he needed that to protect him from the pressure. The atmosphere that reaches the moon that they're talking about is what's called the Geo Corona, which is essentially the outermost part of the exosphere, which is the uppermost part of the atmosphere. For all intents and purposes, it's a vacuum. It's all it really is about I think it's hydrogen particles that it's made of. I don't recall. I could be wrong there, but basically, it's very diluted. Like people. I see a lot of people basically overreacting to things like the thermosphere or the exosphere and whatnot. When people see the thermosphere, they say, "Oh, the thermosphere is several thousands of temperature." Well, how do the ISS and all that sort of stuff survive? Well, they survive because it's not dense enough to transfer heat on the macroscopic level. Likewise, the exosphere isn't dense enough for it to be an issue on the moon and stuff. For all intents and purposes, it's still a vacuum. That's I just wanted to correct you on that one and stuff, because I've really been
people have been sending me links to those articles all the time, and I really get kind of distressed by people overreacting to them. No offense, but I'm just saying.
I was just wondering if it was kind of like another thing, a bow, what's the word, string to their bow, where they might be preempting people like us as we're getting further to the truth. They might be saying, oh, our backup plan is, well, of course the moon is within Earth's atmosphere, so of course we can make it. It's almost kind of like another rebuttal to us saying, well, astronauts can't survive the radiation outside of our atmosphere and into the Allen radiation belt.
That's not really that's not really what the exosphere is all about and stuff. But what you brought up actually does segue into something that I think is worth discussing. The portion that actually extends out to the moon. It's only actually sort of elongated like. In fact, I'll do another screen share here. Here, let me start sharing. Okay. Now the reason that the thing extends out towards the moon and stuff is because we have the solar wind. It doesn't just blow back the Geo Corona. It also blows back the electromagnetic field of the Earth. You see, the reason why we have Van Allen belts in the first place is because the Earth has a liquid outer core, which basically generates this. It extends to about 10 Earth radii and stuff, but on the far side, it extends. Literally, you could easily fit about 100 or so Earths behind it to reach the end of the magnetic field tail. And what's recently been proposed for manned missions to the moon, right? Because the tail extends far beyond the orbit of the moon, right? During the time that the moon is full, the moon actually enters this tail, and during the time that it's in the magnetotail, it receives the same protection from solar flares and cosmic rays that the Earth receives. You see, it doesn't matter for the International Space Station or the shuttle or the Soyuz or anything like that, because they're below the Van Allen belts and they're always going to be within the Earth's magnetic field. But if you're trying to go to the moon, the ideal time to go to the moon, assuming you can get past the radiation belts, of course, would be to basically launch your capsule down the magnetotail so that it will catch up with the moon when it enters the tail. And so you've got a 7-day window to do what you've got to do on the lunar surface and get off the moon, and then basically launch back down the tail to return to the Earth. Again, you have to avoid the Van Allen radiation belts. But this was actually proposed by Erica Harnett. She wrote a few articles about this. Basically, what she's proposing to basically ferry astronauts to and from the moon down the magnetosphere tail. And so it really is testament stuff like this. They didn't have to do that on Apollo. Why are we considering using the magnetosphere tail now when it wasn't an issue on the Apollo missions?
It's an important point, because I've been looking, when I was doing some video replies to an Apollo believer, I made the point that the phases of the moon during the missions varied quite considerably. So, for example, with the Apollo 13 mission, which of course was the only mission in the entire program that had any major malfunction, the moon was basically half waxing to gibbous. And so that means it wasn't within that tail. The moon would have to be in full or near full to be within that tail.
That's correct.
So
yes.
So had there been none of that protection at all?
That's correct. The Apollo missions, they went during a time when they didn't have this kind of protection. And in fact, the Russians, they had actually told the British astronomer, Sir Bernard Lovell, he actually did a tour of the Soviet Union in the 1960s, in 1963, I believe it was. And the president of the Soviet Academy of Scientists, his name was Keldysh, he basically said, okay, we're postponing manned moon missions indefinitely until we can solve the shielding against solar flares, until we can protect astronauts. Go tell cosmonauts, I should say. We can't protect our cosmonauts from the radiation from the sun, so, go tell NASA. He basically relayed those concerns in a letter to Deputy Director Hugh Dryden, and he even published a few articles about that. Lovell did, but nothing really ever came about that. The Soviets, they just they postponed manned missions indefinitely, whereas NASA, they said, "Oh, okay, well, let's go there anyways." Supposedly.
Yeah, there's some interesting work that Scott has done recently on vacuums and the power of vacuums. And that is something which is never usually discussed to any great extent, because most people think of a vacuum as being lack of air pressure. But in fact, a powerful vacuum, which you've got on the moon, can create particular effects on any form of liquid. Now, if you've got oil or any form of lubrication in, shall we say, the cameras, for instance, which there are, that would immediately vaporize. We saw Gene Cernan on Apollo 17 doing his magnificent repair of the rover fender by using gaffer tape to attach a map to the back of the fender. Mm-hmm. Well, it's highly unlikely that gaffer tape, which is basically an adhesive, would work in a vacuum. And there's also a much more important point about the photographic film. During the construction of and the research into the spy satellites, specifically the Corona and the Hexagon spy satellite, known as KH-9 and KH-10, one of the things that was discovered was that photographic film, which was being used in those spy satellites, disintegrates in a vacuum, so it can't be used. So in order to ensure that they could use photographic film in those spy satellites, which was used, the film had to be pressurized the whole time it was in the satellite, i.e. from the 30 miles of film which is on the photographic film reel, the track through which it followed to go through the cameras and then into the capsule which was dropped to be caught by aircraft below, the film was pressurized, and there were little tubes which contained the pressurized atmosphere. It was nitrogen gas. It was only at 1 pound per square inch, but it was sufficient to ensure that photographic film could be used. Now, we know that there was no pressurization on any of the Hasselblad cameras. Therefore, the film could not have survived the vacuum which we know exists on the moon. So how were the photographs taken? Well,
interesting.
They were taken from Earth.
Interesting point, Marcus. I hadn't heard one about the vacuum. I'll have to look into that one. One thing I would like to add to what you just said, in fact, when they had the before Apollo missions, they had what was called the Lunar Orbiter missions, numbers 1 to 5. These were specifically intended for mapping the lunar surface down to 1 meter resolution. They used film cameras, but they actually had to use a specially hardened film that was specifically designed to be able to withstand the kind of radiation that they would be experiencing. I don't remember the exact name of the film in question and stuff, but basically it was hardy stuff. But yet on Apollo, David Percy actually did a interview with what was his name? I forget the guy. He was from Kodak, anyways, and he was saying, the film we had on Apollo was ordinary. It must have been the camera that was. Jan Lundberg was the guy who made the camera and stuff. They interviewed him too. Lundberg, he said, "Oh no, it was not the camera that was special. It must have been the film that was special."
That was Hasselblad.
Yeah, you put these two guys in the same room together. It'd be interesting to see how they would explain how this thing was working. Well, one says, "Oh, the film was special." No, the film wasn't special. It was the camera that was special. So which?
It was the transport of the film. And it's interesting you mentioned the Lunar Orbiter craft, which did use photographic film. That was being developed at very much the same time as the Corona satellite, the mid-1960s. And the people working on that were working under very strict security measures. They were not really permitted to discuss it. It's quite likely that the Lunar Orbiter used pressurized film. I don't know if it did or not. I haven't seen any evidence for it, but it would make sense that it did. And it's interesting that the Lunar Orbiter film is only recently been rediscovered, and people are trying to read, because it was all done on transmission. They were trying to read what the photographs actually show. And the resolution on the Lunar Orbiter is actually considerably better, as you've demonstrated very persuasively, than the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter films, which allegedly show the lunar landers. No, they show pixels.
It's just some black blobs.
I've actually done a whole series of videos on the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. In fact, I think one of the best indications, first of all, it's important to understand how these pictures are received. Many people think, you can just point a dish to these pictures and you can see them for yourself. Well, that's not how it doesn't work like that. You see, the files are sent as encrypted files, I should say, encrypted files that are basically transmitted down to the NASA tracking facilities. They're then passed on to the Goddard Space Flight Center. And then they're passed on to
onto Arizona State University. You know, this elaborate game of pass the parcel, as I like to call it, that gives an opportunity for NASA to basically, okay, let's add these to the photo. Okay, now we send it to ASU. But I think the best evidence that something's up with those photographs is NASA claims that they have photographs of the American flags casting a shadow. Yeah. Of course, it's just pixels and stuff. And basically, they say we see the flag casting an elongated shadow. Well, that's impossible because the flag. There's no way the flag could have survived this long. The Soviets, they actually did something similar when they had their Mir station. They erected their own Soviet flag outside, up on the mast of the Mir station, and of course, sometime after the flag was erected, the Soviet Union collapsed and stuff. So there was little point in having that flag up anymore. But of course, they couldn't make an unscheduled EVA to go and retrieve it. And 2 years elapsed, and by the time they went out to retrieve it and stuff, it was reduced to only 2 threads. It was destroyed by the radiation, the micrometeoroids, and of course there was orbital debris there and stuff. But when you do the calculations, to take the orbital debris out of the equation, you find a flag that would have was exposed to because you remember the lunar orbiters, they also carried micrometeoroid detector packages, which we could use to, calculate what kind of damage the flag would have received. And when you do the calculations, you find that the flags, at best, they would have lasted about 10 years. They would have been destroyed by 1980. And well, so how are they still standing and casting these shadows? It doesn't make any sense.
It's standing on the lunar set, which they probably still got somewhere tucked away, probably at Menlo Park in the airship hangar, is where they filmed, which is where they filmed From the Earth to the Moon.
That's it. Yep, the life imitates art, but there's actually no evidence from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter that we see anything that couldn't be created artificially through manipulated images. And Jarrah, in your series of films, you actually reproduce these yourself in your own home.
That's correct. I was able to throw it into MS Paint. Nothing fancy. It's not Photoshop or anything. Just MS Paint. I was able to put it in MS Paint. Okay, a few dots here or there. Okay, I needed some work on the shadow, but other than that, it looked pretty much identical to the photos that was allegedly supposed to be the lunar module. It takes a few pixels. That's literally all it is. There's a few pixels, and well, we have spy satellites and even there's the satellite Geo I-1, which is essentially a commercially accessible satellite, which, for all intents and purposes, takes the same resolution as the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, and yet its pictures are much more distinct. You can clearly see people walking the sidewalks. You can see cars. You can see trees. You can see, you can see what people are doing and stuff like that. You can see their little dinghies if it's taking a picture of the ocean and whatnot. And it's clear that the footage that they have from the Geo I-1 it's substantially visually superior to what we have on the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter.
So, Scott, I wanted to ask you about your own work regarding what you've just heard from Jarrah and Marcus and Bart about the very highest levels of the Earth's atmosphere and the electromagnetosphere and things like that.
Well, all of those things are still theoretical in nature when it comes right down to it, because nobody has a solid understanding of exactly what's going on there. I mean, it varies all the time. The radiation varies dramatically with the solar pulses and stuff like that. What I'd like to do is share the screen a little bit here, if I could. And there's my screen. Can you see that?
I don't see it yet. Okay, now I see something. Oh. Yeah, I see your screen.
Oh, here we go. Yep.
Nice car.
Yeah. Well, it's not bad.
The Bugatti?
That's a 2025 Bugatti Aerolith.
Okay.
Hasn't quite come out yet. Here's a nice shot of the flag here. Pull it up and see how nice and soaking wet it is. All right. I'm sure keeping it wet on the moon stops it from degrading so much. You can see all the water there. You can see it drying into the edges back. You can see that it's an official flag, and the stars are stitched on there. It's not like other people that say it's aluminum or anything like that. It's just one little thing on there. What I'd like to do is do a little bit on Apollo 15 on Hadley Ridge. So this is the ridge itself, the right where the astronauts were on Apollo 15. They're claiming that it is 1,200 feet deep. Okay, and you can see the scale across the bottom there. It's just about a mile across, just a little under a mile across there is what you're looking at. So there's the CN Tower in Toronto. It's 1,150 feet to the restaurant. Empire State Building's 1,200 feet to the roof right there. Not to the turret, to the roof. 1,200 feet deep. So those are the images that you can see that you're looking at. And there's a shot. There's actually where they're standing.
Oh dear.
Just a sec. I run back through this way. All right. Come up.
Maybe just create a different window for that picture you're trying to show. There we go.
Yeah, but there's the actual thing. That's a mile across there and 1,200 feet deep. You can see that quite clearly.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just a complete error in simulation. And right there, if you're looking back at this map here, off the edge, right off that corner, is the LEM should be sitting straight there. And I've been looking for it everywhere. I even have an elevation map to show that it's not there anywhere in that shot. Simply not there on the thing of it. It's just a total error in simulation to have that a mile across that way.
So it's like a continuity error here.
They just completely missed it. Together with the entire thing. There's the actual map where you can see exactly where they were sitting on that comparison to the other photographs there. So now you're looking right at that corner right there.
Mm.
And that's where they're shooting from. They should be able to see the LEM from there. And it just clearly isn't there. But the depth of this thing is just on, like, that might be 130 or 40 feet across and maybe 75 or 80 feet deep. That's supposed to be 1,200 feet deep. Like, if you're standing at the observation deck on the Empire State Building and looking down, that's what you'd be looking at. Okay. The other thing I have here, here's Meteor Crater, which is about half the depth of what they claim Hadley Ridge is, but it's approximately the same distance across. This is just under a mile across. That's the depth of the thing. This is Meteor Impact Crater. There you can see it's 560 feet deep, and it's just about 3/4 of a mile across. And that's exactly that image that you're looking at on there. It is just an absolute fantasy land little simulation that they did. They weren't even close. They weren't even close to it. Now, when it comes to vacuums, most people claim that the vacuum of space is the difference between one atmosphere. So why would they build this building? And I even talking to a few people, and they say, well, this was a make-work project, and they were using inferior materials just to get rid of it, the concrete. There's 8 feet thick of concrete and another 2 feet thick of steel. The interior design of this thing, it is specially lined in there with an anti-corrosive on it, because when you get down to a torr level, you get down to about a torr value of 10 to the minus 4, you start getting into off-gassing, even in metals on it. So like even aluminum starts off-gassing hydrogen at that level on the thing. Pull up a little video clip here from what we did, Paul and I did. This is just a quick little one.
They stand on the outside of the tank, and it implodes in a thrilling fashion. Well, there it was.
You can see how fast. You can see how fast that comes down to. That is only low pressure. You're not even getting into the torr value. You still have. You've only reduced. You're down to 176 torr. You're not even into a minus scale at that level. Other people claim that there's only one difference of 1 atmosphere when you go into a vacuum, and that a pop can would do it. This is only at about 400 torr that this goes off at. Now, a pop can will handle about 80 pounds of pressure on it, and that's just with a little home vacuum, just to rough it down. So now we're going to get into a little bit on the suits itself, because this you're going to find it absolutely amazing. I think I put them all up here. As you can see here, these are just quick release clips that are on here. Okay, there's no inner bladder like they claimed to keep the suit from popping out. There's another shot of the interior from the top helmet on it. These have just like a door latch on there, and that's just a rubber seal. Okay, this door latch holding the cap in will not compress that seal down in any way, shape, or form.
It reminds me actually of the door of a washing machine.
Now,
so
take a look at the back of the suit here.
I'll come to you in a minute, Jarrah.
Okay, this is the back of the suit. There's the zipper, that blue with the bead on it there. And there's that much space in there, and the air can come right down through the top on this thing. There's absolutely no way, you can see that it was sealing anything off at all.
Jarrah, you wanted to ask a question?
Yeah, you showed a video from Paul on the plane. He's a flat earther, isn't he?
He does my videos.
There's a
does all my videos.
There's a
but he's a flat earther.
No, he's not. He does my videos.
There are a contingent of people within this community who question the Apollo moon landings, who are members of the Flat Earth movement. Now, this is something.
Don't get started on those people.
And it's not really relevant, I don't think, in this case, Jarrah. I mean, I just agree.
I think keep our politics separate. I don't discuss American politics with them. We don't discuss flat Earth. We do faking space series.
I personally believe the Earth is round myself. They call us roundheads or globalists. I am.
Not Cavaliers then.
Yeah, no, exactly. And
I just had my fair share of bullshit from the flat Earth crowd and stuff. And I'll tell you right up and stuff.
when I first got involved in the moon landing hoax movement and stuff, one of the websites that I turned to was the Bill Casing tribute site, and well, the webmaster of that site, he goes by the name of Albino Gallipini. He went off the deep end quite a few years ago and started promoting flat Earth bullshit in his articles and in his YouTube channel and whatnot. And I've tried to reason with him several times, and I've completely done with him. Completely done with him. I am boycotting.
What happened with Gallipini is a great shame. What happened with Gallipini, that is a great shame. I mean, Gallipini was very good. He was actually very interesting what he said about the Capricorn 1 movie, which was very interesting. It's a great shame that he has unfortunately swallowed the flat Earth Kool-Aid, which I agree with you, Jarrah. I think it's a great disappointment. But I'm still very interested in, and I thank the man for the good work he did before that.
So what we're looking at here is a spacesuit, essentially, with 2 strips of Velcro and press studs. How would that seal, or how are they telling us that it seals?
Well, I'm just showing you the back. That's as far as the zipper goes up, right there.
Right.
Is that just an ordinary zipper? I mean, it looks like something
It's a little heavier duty. It's got 2 sets of teeth on it. Okay, but the zipper's not going to seal in a vacuum anyway.
No, you can't even keep rainwater out with a zip. You have to put like
how are they telling us?
You couldn't even do underwater stuff with this. What I'm showing you is like these suits are just completely designed for simulation. Okay, just on the set to keep them cool. Like I said, the head unit here, you can see down at the bottom, right in there. That's where the little fan that's blowing the air around coming up out of the PLSS, and the PLSS isn't exactly the one that you would need to be on the moon with. All it is a set of cooling coils running around in there. But you can see that none of this stuff is going to do anything. And there again, you see there's no inner bladder on that. And then the suit, all of these are attached right to the outside of the suit. They're not attached to an inner bladder in any way, shape, or form. And the one guy that's working for NASA or writes on their journal site has a book out. It's Paulo Altamisto or something is the guy's name, and he claims that it's another completely different suit. That's just a band to hold on the top shielding of the suit. Mm. But when you see the original on this with just the way those rings are on the helmet ring, there's the gloves themselves, and you see they're done exactly the same way. No inner liner, no seal. This is on the left-hand side are what seals would be for that level of vacuum that they're in. And when you get to a torr value of 10 to the -6, you can't use rubber. You got to use metal rings on them, and they have to be properly compressed down. And of course, these don't have any of these. These are just quick release, so you can put them on and off for simulation. And the helmet's exactly the same way.
So, and obviously, you need to keep them clean. You would know they'd have to be make sure there's no dust or anything else that might break the seal.
Even something as small as a hair would stop them from being able to pump down a vacuum here on Earth. They can't achieve that vacuum. Can you imagine now? They're coming in and out of the LEM, covered in dust, over top of the door seals.
How do you answer the criticism of people who say, "Oh, it's no big deal. It'd just be like a slow puncture on your tire if there was like a hair or something in there"? How do you answer that?
The one they claimed on the International Space Station.
They said that
his finger up there, he'd go through that so quick it'd be like going through a shredder, you know. Here's a couple of shots of Apollo 11. This is Buzz Aldrin coming down the ladder, and you can see the red here and the red here. The gloves aren't even attached. They're not done up, and I can show you that.
Do you think this might have been a prototype suit for simulation purposes, but they kind of realized that they couldn't get to the moon, and maybe they had in mind they were going to do like a pressurized sealed version, but then thought, do you know what, there's no point, we might as well just fake it and use the simulation suit?
I don't think they really tried that hard when they were doing the simulations. I mean, people have looked at these pictures for years and years and years, and like I said, not that one. Just a sec. I can pull this one up.
You notice that there is a lot they got covered with this dust as well, so
yeah,
it was all over their bodies.
Like here's Smith, and he's just absolutely covered in mud here on the left, and then they've actually washed it off to take the next shot. Just 2 frames later.
There was a very good series of films.
It's literally covered in mud.
Could they argue that's just a shadow?
You can argue that all you want. There's Cernan. There's a sleeve right there on Cernan from Apollo 17. You can see it nice, shiny mud right on there, like that. Like I said, they're spending a whole lot of money just so they can keep alive 2 guys playing in the mud with a wet flag.
Is it? I mean, like the Apollo believers say that this is basically simply static cling that caused this. However, there was a very good series of films that have actually been removed from YouTube that claim that this was actually from the studio. They actually mixed the ground material with its very sort of low-grade ground material with oil, so that it didn't move about in the atmosphere, in the air too much, and that is actually why it stuck to the suits. Do you think that's likely? I know those videos have been removed from YouTube; they're just gone.
I know that. Like I'm looking at sheer water here because there's rainwater everywhere. If you look at how the gloves are done up, that ring is sitting there, and this other one's this far up, and that's the distance between them.
They would not covering it. Yeah, I mean, even the slowest puncture in the world would have been disastrous in a spacesuit, because basically the spacesuit basically covers the body. There's actually very little in terms of actual loose air. There's not much there.
That's right.
The interior of the helmet, mostly.
These they didn't even bother to do up. This is Buzz Aldrin. This is the man on the moon shot, the most famous shot in the world, right? And his glove isn't done up.
I think that's just the outermost layer of the thing. There was supposed to be the pressure stuff and the pressure bladder part of the glove, and the over part is like
there's the glove right there.
Thermodynamic. Yeah, well, there's supposed to be a ring underneath that where it clips into.
That's the red ring. That's the red ring, and that's where it connects up there. And that's one spot, and there's the other spot. There's 3 inches of space there between them.
So you say that, like, underneath. Sorry, Jarrah.
I was just saying. I think I can't point to the screen here because that's obviously it's not my thing. Are you able to move your mouse where I'm talking about?
Yeah. Where would you like to see it?
Well, the glove on the bottom there, on the bottom of the picture on the left there, I think that has the flap rolled up, so you can see the ring. I believe that's yeah. That's the one on the bottom there has it. Yeah. If you see, it looks to me like it's got that flap rolled up, so you can see the connecting part of the ring, and I believe that would be folded back down like the one on top there. I think that's why it looks loose.
But when you look at the other picture, that ring is in there, and the other ring is all the way up there. Like this ring is right there. You can see the black. Like when you're looking at his picture.
So you're saying that underneath that, the flap that's pulled up over Aldrin's wrist, underneath that flap, the actual seal is undone. Is that what you're saying, Scott?
Yeah, there's not enough room. You can see there's the black ring right there.
Okay.
Black band. Then there's that. Okay? That's how far down it is into the glove to get the other ring is there. So the rings are this far apart. Might be a little closer there. Might be up to there. That's about it. There's that much space in between them. They're not connected. There's not enough they don't come up. That doesn't come up far enough for these two rings to be connected. Because that red ring you can see it right there. You can see it along the line of it, and that's the black band. And the other ring is down here, and it doesn't pull up.
All right. Is it all right if I ask another question, which is going back slightly to what Scott said, and I think Marcus might be able to jump in on this as well. You mentioned the PLIS, the PLSS, the personal life support system. It consists. Is there an oxygen tank and just a cooling system and heating and things like that?
There's a few liters of water which is pumped around to cool the astronauts, and we're told that it is sublimated out, and you get the decompression of water removing the heat. But you never see any clouds of steam or clouds of ice crystals which would occur on the lunar surface if it was doing that.
You would also need the ambient temperature is very high. What kind of heat sink? You'd have to go and stand in the shade every so often for a certain amount of time. And there are a
lot of people who use scuba equipment who would dearly love to have a tank that they could use for 8 hours underwater, which is what we're told happened on Apollo 17. They were out on the EVA for 8 hours without replenishing any of the equipment they were carrying on the back, like no water. You can do the calculation. I think Ralph Rene did the calculation in his book. How much water would you need to remove the predicted amount of heat that will be generated on the lunar surface?
Okay. He calculated about something like 20 kilograms of water. I did a demonstration in one of my videos.
Is there anything else, Marcus? Would you like to add anything to the?
Yes, I'd just like to go back to something you mentioned earlier. You made a reference to a film indicating that how it was all done.
Do you mean Capricorn 1?
No. Okay. I'm talking about it's the film that's been removed from YouTube. Well, part of it.
Scintillation.
Yeah.
Is that the one? It's the film that's called Make Believe.
That's it.
And Mirrors.
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now that has been removed. Well, I can't find it online. It's 2 hours 44 minutes. And one of the problems with it is that you can't hear the narration, because the narrator says at the beginning that he doesn't want anybody to recognize who he is, which is fair enough. The point is that film, you can find it if you know where to look. It's been archived on Owlus, the Owlus website. Good. And it's also on the website that accompanies this book, Man on the Moon, Fact or Fiction. It's a new book just published a couple of months ago by Trevor Weaver. What he's done, 500 pages, we're talking a lot of information, and as his reference, he uses YouTube films. Several of Jarrah's are on there. Some of Scott's work is on there. A couple of mine are on there. There's about 900 hours of YouTube film, and I believe Scott's watched it all. The point is that one of the chapters in that book refers to the film Smoke and Mirrors, Make Believe, Smoke and Mirrors. Somebody has taken that film, split it into 20-minute segments, and put subtitles on it. So
that's the one I saw. Yeah.
Right, now that is available. It's called MB, Make Believe, MB Enhanced. That's the actual reference to it. If you go on to Trevor Weaver's website, which is man-on-the-moon.info, and you go to section 19, that's where you'll find Make Believe, Smoke and Mirrors.
Thanks very much, Marcus, because when that was sort of disappeared from YouTube and put down the memory hole, I was concerned. Obviously, this is what YouTube do regularly now to videos they don't like, and so I hope listeners will make a note of that too, because I'm sure some of them will be interested in seeing it as well.
Yeah.
So thanks. But who's the mysterious narrator?
Well, the chapter which is entitled "Who," who was behind it, who was behind the fabrication of Apollo, he comes up with two very, very interesting names. One of them is Douglas Trumbull, who was Stanley Kubrick's special effects director on 2001. He also did the special effects on Back to the Future, Star Trek the movie, Blade Runner, and Close Encounters. He was using models on all those. They weren't CGI. He also refers to John Dykstra, who did the special effects on Star Wars, as being possibly people who might have been involved. They certainly had the ability to do it because they were using models, cameras, special effects. They were using a special photographic technique, which is called motion capture, using a snorkel camera, which films models, and when projected, it looks life-size. And they're also using an optical projector. Now, Jarrah, I know, has done work on the slow motion figures. In the enhanced version, there are 7 different slow motion speeds that he's identified, depending on where the astronauts happen to be in relation to the camera. He also says the camera is also very busy, which distracts the viewer. The camera always appears to be moving. The problem was that you cannot film a slow motion effect of sand dropping. So when you get an astronaut kicking the sand, his movement appears to be faster than the sand. His movement appears to be slower than the sand is falling at, which indicates that because you can put a lot of things on wires, like astronauts and pieces of equipment, you can't put sand on wires. So the sand is one of the big giveaways of the slow motion technique. There were 3 different film sizes used: 16 millimeter, 36 millimeter, and 70 millimeter. These were all used as a result of the technique of transferring the information, probably 16 millimeter originally, onto different sizes and different speeds and different falling rates to make it appear to be on the moon. There's also a lot of model work done and a very large scale model of the lunar surface derived from the lunar orbiter photographs. That's where most of them come from. So those films are still available. As I say, if you know where to look, you go on the Aldous website or go on Trevor Weaver's website. I would also like to mention another book just published by Randy Walsh, who lives quite near to Scott, in Toronto. And he's working on his part 2. This is the Apollo Moon Missions, Hiding a Hoax in Plain Sight, part 1. Part 2 looks into more detail. It's a fairly technical book, so it's a great interest to people who are looking at the technical side, as we are, of Apollo. And Randy has done a great job in collating the information, putting it together, and publishing it in a fairly easily assimilated format.
Oh, that's another book I've got to read as well. I'm glad people are.
Book to read. And yesterday, on Friday, I was up in London being interviewed by Zigzag Productions, who are re-updating their previous film, which was filmed in 2003, called "Did We Land on the Moon?"
Right.
That's not the correct title.
Yeah, well, the truth behind the moon landings, wasn't it?
Yeah, the truth behind the moon landings. That was filmed by Zigzag Production. That shows Jay Windley capering around on the desert outside Los Angeles, trying to prove that the shadows do what everybody says they do.
I saw that. It was very amusing, actually, because there was a skeptic program made about this as well, or Apollo Believer one. He made the same mistake that Mythbusters did. He said, "I'm going to prove that the Apollo missions were shot in sunlight and not in a studio under artificial light by creating a simulation under artificial light.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, you couldn't make it up.
Yeah, in
One
fact,
thing is,
Jarrah's critique of that original program, which was very comprehensive, I sent it to the person who was interviewing me, Rachel Sutton, before she interviewed me. So she knew that though she wasn't involved in the original program, because she was still at school when that was made, she knew that the original program had a lot of faults in it, a lot of factual inaccuracies. And specifically the idea of trying to demonstrate that the moon landings were shot under artificial light somewhere here on Earth was rather comprehensively demonstrated, because that's exactly what they did. Why didn't, as Bart said in his critique of it, why didn't they wait 12 hours to wait for the sun to come up and shoot them in sunlight? Would have made much more sense. And they were using a desert which has a far higher reflectivity. Again, that's what Jarrah demolished the NVIDIA film. How much reflectivity the surface in their film had, about 40% as opposed to 8%, the reflectivity of the moon. So they basically falsified all their investigation by doing it wrong. It's much easier to do it correctly. Use the sun. That's what they were supposed to have done.
Well, they could have shot it on an asphalt road and got the reflectivity right, because the asphalt has the exact same reflectivity as the moon. It's in the same range.
Yeah, I think you did a video, Jarrah. You did a video with
lots of you capering around with a cardboard box on a road.
That's the one, yeah, with the cardboard box.
Yes.
And you couldn't reproduce the photograph correctly.
That's correct. Not without either opening up the aperture to the point that the whole landscape was overexposed, or taking the box off, ironically, and just letting the blue sky act as a natural fill light. But of course, you don't get blue sky on the moon because it doesn't have an atmosphere like that.
Yeah. So this is that's very true. And so coming back to the make-believe movie, Marcus, is it the person who doesn't want to be identified? I mean, I don't know who they are, and I wouldn't say so if I did. But is it actually someone? Is it actually an insider? Someone who actually produced what? Either it was Trumbull or someone else who produced the original moon hoax footage, the NASA footage.
I don't know that, to be honest. Whoever has produced the film has put a lot of work into it. As I say, the film itself is 2 hours 44 minutes. It's much easier to watch it with subtitles so you can hear what he's saying. But whoever has done it has a great technical knowledge of photography and special effects and how models would look under different situations. It's a very, very comprehensive investigation, and it would appear to be the explanation for how NASA did it. Now, whether it is an insider, which is why they don't want themselves to be identified, or somebody who has just taken a great deal of trouble and is somebody probably quite well known within the film business because of the sheer technical ability they have to explain things, I don't know. But one possible location for where it was all put together originally is Lookout Mountain Laboratory, which is north of Los Angeles. It was a US Air Force facility up to the end of the 1960s when it was moved to, I believe, McGill Air Force Base. But they were very proud of the fact that they had the best equipped photographic film studio in Hollywood. It was better than any of the Hollywood studios. They produced technical films, promotional film, propaganda films. That's on the face of it. Now, they had the facilities there to produce something much more spectacular. Now, Lookout Mountain Laboratory still exists. It's now a private house owned by Gerald Letter, the singer and actor. It's got a big facility, and it could well have been used. I don't know if it was or not, but it makes sense that it might have been used.
Now, this is an important point. Like, if you were involved in this hoax, so you were the person directing it and producing it, you have an awful lot of talent in Hollywood you could have used. And we've mentioned Trumbull. And of course, you probably guessed the next question I'm going to ask, and this is something that has come up. Was Stanley Kubrick involved?
Only in that he gave his name to a now well-known artifact, the Kubrick horizontal, which is the line which appears in virtually every Apollo lunar photograph of the division between the rather poorly defined background mountains and the well-defined foreground area where the astronauts were capering about. I don't know if Kubrick was involved. The evidence doesn't point to the fact that he was, because he was working at the time on completing 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was released in 1968. Whether he was blackmailed into it, as some people claim, but bear in mind he refused to fly because he was terrified of flying. So if he did work on it, he would have done it at Boreham Wood Studios. And I don't think that there are too many people who would work at Boreham Wood Studio who could have seen something like that happening, wouldn't have mentioned it or referred to it. So no, I don't think that Kubrick himself was directly involved.
No, I've always doubted Kubrick's direct involvement. Partly, it was the kind of man he was, and Vivian Kubrick, his daughter, has spoken about this a lot. It was his friendship with Andrei Tarkovsky, the Russian filmmaker. It was the fact that he was anti-establishment in many ways. But the fact is, his behaviour, for example, is some of his eccentricities, not travelling. He hardly left his home. His home was very close to Boreham Wood. And he hardly left that area. The furthest he travelled in the last 3 decades of his life was to Beachley Peninsula Army Base to film part of Full Metal Jacket. And that's in Gloucestershire, on the Welsh border. That's about as far as he went. So that's very. You say he wouldn't fly. I mean, he wouldn't. He could have got on a ship and travelled to the United States, where obviously he had lots of family living. So that's odd behaviour for the man. Very odd indeed.
If I can just interject,
Neil.
A book that I've been reading over the past few months, where I can see if I can screen share it. There's possible. I wouldn't say definite, but possible suggestions. See if I can share this.
This is Carl's book, Carl James.
No, it's not that. Let's see if I can start sharing. Bear with me a second. Let me know if you can see this. But it was Alphabet and Moon, and in the book, the David Bryant is the author, I believe. He's an astronomer in the UK. He also used to be a helicopter pilot, but he's actually also a bit of a Apollo fan, if you like, and he's gone round various events where some of the astronauts have been appearing, and he noted that they all had slightly different stories and experiences of going to the moon. Some could hear sounds when they were going down in the lunar module. Others said it was very, very quiet and things like that.
Some say they don't remember stars, some things.
Remember stars, some don't, that kind of thing. But one of the interesting things was that he's been going around schools in the UK and doing presentations, and he says he does his presentations to say the Apollo moon missions were fact. And this is an interesting sideline, but I'll mention it anyway because it's quite funny. One of the teachers that was present during his presentation to kids at this school, he goes, hang on a minute, are you saying that we've been to the moon? And he goes, yeah, we have. And he goes, no, that's not right. He says, what do you mean it's not right? He says, well, I would have heard about it. And this is a teacher that, it's gone through the system, and supposedly he said, I would have heard about it, definitely heard about it, that we've gone to the moon. So he couldn't actually believe it, the kind of scientific education that these teachers are now getting. But anyway, that's the sideline. But one of the things he said that was when he was clearing up after one of his presentations to the kids, and this was some school in Bedfordshire in the UK, he said that the audiovisual technician guy that was helping him clear up, a very old gentleman, said that he remembers back in the late 60s meeting Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin at Cardington Hangars, which I think we might have mentioned earlier, in Bedfordshire. And this is where they had the R101 airships, huge, great big hangars. And they had a complete Apollo moon set there, including lunar module, in the Cardington Hangar Halls in Bedfordshire in the UK in 1969, where he said he met Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. And he said it was all hush-hush, but because he worked there at the time, he met them. So that line kind of could account for maybe some connection with the Kubrick story about saying, well, he couldn't fly to the US because he was scared of flying or something like that. But, the Apollo astronauts maybe came to the UK to do it. I don't know, but it was just an interesting thing that I thought I'd mention.
Does he remember exactly when in 1969 this was? Or does he just know the year?
I just remember the year being quoted in the book, but I'll try and call up the pages and edit them over the shots here for people.
Because those two hangars, these huge hangars, which were used to construct airships in the early 20th century. I think they're the biggest indoor spaces in Britain.
Yeah,
and if you wanted to set up a film set, indeed films have been made there. The Batman movie was made. One of the new Star Wars trilogy was made there. It would be a place to go, especially if Kubrick was coerced in some way into getting involved. It's interesting, incidentally, if you read Vivian Kubrick, what she actually said about her father, because she when this first came out, she made a tweet which included an open letter essentially to the people like us, the Apollo hoax people. When it said, what she says is that she defends her father. She said that Stanley Kubrick would never ever have been involved in something like this. He wouldn't have dreamed of doing it. It would be against his principles. What's interesting about what she says is, at no point does she actually say the moon landings were real and we are crazy, stupid, evil people for disbelieving in it. All she says is that her dad wasn't involved. And that's a very, very, it's not what she says, it's what she omits, which I find most interesting about her statement.
Yeah, interesting. You can see these hangars from the M1 motorway. So anyone that's going up the M1 motorway through Bedfordshire, they would see them on the right-hand side if they're heading north, or see them on the south side. On the left-hand side if they're heading south from Bedfordshire. But they're huge hangars, and this guy reckons that he saw a whole moon set there in the late 60s when he was working there in his younger years. So I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Thanks very much. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left now. Is Marcus gone?
No.
All right. We've got about 10 minutes left, gentlemen, and then we're going to have to call it a night. But is there anything else anyone would like to say? So, Scott, do you have any last things you'd like to say in this juncture? Unmute, Scott. Unmute your mic.
There I am.
Yeah, you can hear you, mate, now.
We got you.
Back on. Yeah, well, as far as the 50th anniversary coming up, I know that NASA is spending one pile of money to promote this thing. And they have people like Phil Plait running around to schools and promoting it that way. And those type of things I find rather disturbing, because I don't want my children or my grandchildren, to be brought up in a world where reality isn't really there. They should learn the truth. They should learn exactly what we're capable of as a species. And one of the things it takes away from is like it's fine to have the imagination. It's fine to promote space. It's fine to promote science and technology and stuff like that. But the reality is we got to look after this planet. And to think the fact that we can do all these wonderful things in space, just everybody thinks that, if we mess something up on the planet, we can fix that too. The fact of the matter is we haven't been able to fix anything. All we've done is destroy this planet at an alarming rate. Our mining industry, lumber industry, everything else, even our farming, right, is taking away from our fishing, and we're destroying everything at such an alarming rate. We really can't fix it. We need to pay more attention to it. And when you have people saying, oh, gee, we'll just terraform a new planet and move there, right? It makes us feel that we're invincible as a species, that we will survive without it. We need this planet, and we need to pay more attention and to look after it.
That's actually true, yeah.
And that is one of the biggest deterrents that I see with all of the technology. I mean, it's nice to have the dream, but where is the reality? That is one of the things I'm looking at. Where is the line? What can we do and what can't we do? And the more I look into it, the less we can do.
That's a sad fact. Yeah, I mean, so really what you're saying, Scott, and I agree, is that what happens out there in terms of what our space exploration stories and how real they are and how fake they are has instant and very serious ramifications for the well-being of life on Earth, including human life. And that's absolutely true. Thanks very much for that. And Marcus, what would you like to say before we close?
I'd just say that I've shown the 2 new books that have just been published. There's another very, very good DVD called American Moon, produced by Massimo Mazzucco, who's Italian, worked in America for many years. It's 3.5 hours long. It's very comprehensive. It's very professional. It's certainly worth a look. It's available on Amazon or on Massimo's website. Just put in American Moon Massimo and you'll get his website. You can order it from there. It's an excellent film. It's as good and an updated version of What Happened on the Moon, the David Percy, Mary Bennett production of 20 years ago, which started much of this. But one of the things that Massimo does in his video is show the Apollo photographs to professional photographers, mainly Italian. These are people who photograph for Vogue, for the Pirelli calendar. They're serious photographers. And he says, tell me about these photographs. And they say, well, you can see the fill lights, can't you? You can see where the flash was used. Said, how do you manage to get these pictures to balance out with the directly illuminated surface and the shadow details? You can only do that, he says, with lights. Did they take them? No, they didn't take any lights to the moon. Well, they were taken here on Earth then, weren't they? Anyway, that's worth checking out.
Do you guys think that we will ever get to the moon? If there's ever a possibility of doing it?
Yes.
I think go ahead, Marcus.
No, I'd say that there is a possibility once we've overcome the radiation problem, which could be solved. I think the new technology is coming close to it, but also with a different propulsion system. These chemical rockets, no matter how powerful they appear to be, are extremely dangerous things. They don't always work as well as we're told they do. If we can unscramble some of the secret facilities where the anti-gravity drives are being developed, where the zero-point energy work is being done, we may be able to get to the moon much more easily and get back again. Don't forget, we need to come back as well.
Yeah, that's I know that Andrew Johnson, who often speaks at the High Wycombe Paranormal Group, he's said an awful lot about this, and it's absolutely true. And with such craft, we essentially be set free because these things don't need to carry all that fuel around, which you were talking about earlier on this big rocket. That's Marcus. Thanks very much. And I hope to be talking to you again soon because Marcus and I are going to be working on our own project in the run up to July. Because again, this, as I said, this is an opportunity for us. I think this particular time of this anniversary. So, Jarrah, is there anything you'd like to say before we close?
Yes, I would like to follow up on what Marcus just said about could we get to the moon someday? I don't know about the anti-gravity things that he talked about there, but I believe getting to the moon could be possible through the private sector. When I first got involved in the whole moon hoax discussion, obviously I had 2 motivations. One obviously was to take a stand against the propagandists and trolls that basically try to jump on Casing's grave. But another reason as well, as I said before, when I was a child, I dreamed of going to Mars someday. I dreamed of being an astronaut. I dreamed of becoming the first man on Mars. And I felt as long as NASA kept us living in this fantasy world about how they can somehow get through the radiation belt in only 8 grams per square centimeter of shielding, despite all this severe radiation that can penetrate that, right? I felt as long as they kept us living in this fantasy world, we were never going to solve the radiation hazard for real and get to the moon, right? And so that was part of the reason why I made the Moonfaker series. Then all of a sudden, the SpaceX came along, the private space exploration stuff came along. And with that we've seen true potential. The BFR rocket, I don't know about the spacecraft that Elon Musk is proposing to build, but the actual launch vehicle that he's proposing, that could easily lift the radiation shelter module that would be required to protect the astronauts from the Van Allen radiation belts, from the solar flares. The shelter alone would be about 100 kilograms, 100 tons, sorry. And that could easily be lifted with the rockets that they're proposing to build. Alternatively, you could launch over the cones of escape. That's what Van Allen called them, where the radiation belt actually stops over the poles. If you could put your space capsule into a polar orbit and launch down the magnetotail, that theoretically you could get down to the moon, without any issue from the solar flares, because you got the natural protection of the magnetic field surrounding you, and obviously you'd want to get off the moon before it leaves that tail. But my point is, and stuff, I believe private space exploration is the way of the future. I believe it's going to be not government agencies, which obviously are directionless as it is, but dedicated people, dedicated civilians who are willing to put the energy and put the money into making these new kinds of rockets, and willing to learn from, learn the difference between fantasy and reality, learn from mistakes, how to solve this issue. That is what I believe is going to take us to the moon back eventually.
That's great. Well, that's really interesting, Jarrah, because on the day we're recording this, we actually have SpaceX actually have got an astronaut up on the International Space Station right now. So
they have a crewed version.
Yeah.
They have a crewed Dragon version. They don't have an actual astronaut aboard. It's just
right, okay.
But it is actually the crew variant that they've got up there. They're going to send people up there, I believe, in July. And I believe one of my proposals is, if you have a Dragon that's docked with a habitat module, say maybe the Bigelow Aerospace inflatable one that they've got, and a second module with the shield, theoretically, if their BFR rocket proves feasible, you could easily lift that and send astronauts to the moon and Mars, and you're good as gold, because you've got a shelter with you.
Good point.
Right. Well, write to Elon and let us know what he says, because if he takes you up on your proposal, you might end up being the first man on Mars. Have to wait and see.
I hope so.
Who knows? It might still happen. It might still happen.
I've actually emailed him a lot, and I will say one last thing. I actually emailed him because one of the things that initially he seemed to be on the wrong track, because he says, "Oh, the radiation isn't that big of a deal. We'll just keep a column of water pointed to the sun." I sent him emails basically explaining that's not going to work, because the sun has a magnetic field that deflects the particles in all directions. So you actually have to have all sides of the capsule sheltered. Obviously, everyone came crashing down on him like a ton of bricks after he first unveiled his interplanetary transport system. He later revised it to say, okay, we have a shelter mod. We have what's called a solar flare, a solar storm shelter. He hasn't gone into detail of what it consists of yet. I believe it's either going to be probably going to be shielded by the actual fuel tanks. I don't know yet what. He hasn't unveiled those details. But recently, he stated in an interview. Actually, so it was a press conference. He says, I initially thought that the solar flares were directional, but no, I learned that you need to have all sides shielded. He didn't say who taught him that, but I sent him several emails about it.
Yeah. He says, by the way, Jarrah White from Australia, I've had an interesting correspondence from him, yeah. All right, well, thanks, Jarrah. And Andy and Neil, our esteemed hosts, would you like to say anything before we close?
Neil,
it's been interesting. It's obviously great to have Jarrah and Bart Sibrel join us, two of the very well-known ones in the Apollo hoax conspiracy movement, if that's what you want to call it. So it's been great to have these very esteemed gentlemen on board as well. It certainly gives a lot of extra dimension to our discussions and things like that. So yeah, thanks very much for joining us, Jarrah, and to Bart earlier on.
And I would say, yeah, thanks guys for coming on. I think this is one of these things where it could just go on and on and on and on, but that's kind of what makes it interesting. It'd be really interesting to actually have a decent Apollo believer on as well, not one of our previous guests who went off on a tangent and had quite a go at us for various things, thinking of ganging up on him, because it's not about ganging up on believers and slamming them. It's about finding the truth, and I think you guys are all interested in basically the truth with a capital T. And if we've been lied to, we need to know that we've been lied to. And if the public at large believe that we went to the moon and in fact we didn't, then they have a right to know that. And I've challenged quite a few believers that I know who do come from scientific backgrounds, and it is difficult getting them on the show because I don't know. They seem to be in their own little bubble of this is how it is. They kind of treat it in a way. It's almost like, well, of course he went to the moon. Of course, it's not even worth debating. And I think they really should start questioning their own reality and what they've been told, based on the absolute avalanche of information that we've been talking about for the past 2 hours.
Absolutely, yeah. If there's anyone out there, if you're listening to this or watching, someone who's willing not to ignore us or call us names, but to take the third option and debate with us, you'll be very welcome. It's been a brilliant show. I think this has probably been the biggest meeting of Apollo detective minds ever. I mean, with all the big names have been. What we needed was David Percy and Mary Bennett, and we'd have the full house. So it's been really...
We needed Bill Casing and Ralph Renee as well, but unfortunately they're no longer with us.
Yeah. Rest in peace, those guys. They are the pioneers who inspired us all. And as I've said before, this is March now. It's March 2019. We're approaching the 50th anniversary of the big landing, supposed big landing. And this is a time when I think there's going to be a lot of black propaganda thrown out into the media. Expect to see a couple of films come out and documentaries about how the moon landings were real, possibly with some very, very subtle digs at us and attempts to perhaps a bit of disinformation, very, very sort of tacit disinformation in there without being too obvious. At the same time, this is an opportunity for us. This is an informational choke point which we can exploit, and I think we are doing it. And this program is one of the best ways of doing it. So I thank all you gentlemen very, very much for being involved. Marcus Allen, Scott Henderson, Jarrah White, and of course Neil Geddes-Ward and Andy Chaplin. And I am Ben Emlyn-Jones. I'm Ben Emlyn-Jones of Hospital Porters Against the New World Order. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching. Good evening.
I'll just give a quick shout out to the crew at Deep Thoughts Radio, and they're also on Facebook as well because they're very inspirational, good guys to chat to. And I know that they'll be listening to this at some point. So hello to everyone on Deep Thoughts Radio. Thank you.
And
good
hello
night.
to the CIA and NSA as well. Hi, guys. Hope you enjoy it.
Get a proper job, guys.
Hang on a second. Thanks.
Thanks, Jarrah. Bye-bye.
Take care, Ben.
Shout out to the Vita fandom as well. They just continued this guy. And shout out to those two people too.
Thanks for joining us.
No worries.
That's great. Bye-bye.